Every night, from the shadows of the rooftops, the Lycan King watched her. She was ordinary, or so she believed, unaware of the powerful gaze following her through the city, unaware that a ruler feared by all had taken an interest in her for reasons even he didn't fully understand. To him she was a mystery, and a weakness he could not afford. But everything changes the night danger finds her first. Forced out of hiding, the Lycan King steps in to protect her, revealing a world of secrets, power, and creatures she never knew existed. And in that moment he realizes the truth he can no longer deny. She isn't just someone he's been watching. She's the one fate has bound to him. Now hunted by enemies and tied to a king who was never meant to love, her life will never be the same again. The silence that followed the Lycan King's roar was heavier than the scream itself. Thorin Covington stood in the center of the alley, his massive frame blotting out the moon. He was a vision of prehistoric power, shoulders as broad as a doorway, fur the color of a winter storm, and claws that dripped with the ichor of the mercenary he had just swatted aside like a bothersome insect. He didn't look at the two remaining dregs scrambling for their silver-coated blades. His focus was entirely on the girl huddled against the brick wall. Elara Vane's heart was drumming against her ribs so hard she feared it might crack them. She should have been screaming. She should have been running until her lungs burned. But as she looked up at the towering creature, a strange, misplaced sense of recognition washed over her. It was the eyes, amber, swirling with gold, and filled with a haunted intelligence that felt more human than any man she had ever known. Before we reveal Elara's hidden past, I have to ask, who is your favorite protector character from any movie or book? Someone who watches from the shadows? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying the tension, don't forget to subscribe so you can see how this royal mystery unfolds. Elara had lived her 23 years in the quietest corners of Oak Haven. An orphan raised by a distant aunt who spoke more to her rosebushes than to her niece, Elara had grown up feeling like a ghost in her own life. She worked at the St. Jude's archive, buried under dust and vellum, translating ancient texts that no one cared about. Her deepest desire wasn't wealth or even adventure. It was simply to belong. To be seen. She had always felt off-tempo with the world. Frequencies others couldn't hear would make her teeth ache. She could sense a storm coming 3 days before the clouds gathered. He thought she was broken. She didn't realize she was just tuned to a different channel. "Get up," Thorin rasped. The transformation was receding, the hulking Lupin features shifting, bones snapping and sliding back into a human configuration with a sickening wet sound. Elara watched, mesmerized and horrified as the beast shrunk. Within seconds, a man stood before her. He was tall, dressed in a tactical black coat that looked like it cost more than her apartment building. His hair was a wild mane of dark teak, and his face was carved from granite, sharp cheekbones, a straight, noble nose, and that same golden gaze. "You're the one," Elara whispered, her voice cracking. "From the rooftops. Every night at 11:15. You sit on the ledge of the bakery across from my window." Thorin froze. He had prided himself on his stealth, on being the apex predator of the night. To hear this fragile creature recount his schedule with such precision was a blow to his ego, and a testament to her perception. "You weren't supposed to notice," he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in her chest. "Hard not to notice a shadow that feels like a furnace," she countered, pushing herself up. Her knees shook, but she stood her ground. Behind Thorin, the two remaining mercenaries found their courage. "Covington," one of them hissed, leveling a specialized air rifle. "The High Council didn't say the king was moonlighting as a bodyguard. Move aside and we might let you keep your pelt." Thorin didn't even turn around. A cruel, elegant smile touched his lips, a smile that promised violence. "The High Council has no jurisdiction in my city. And you," he glanced back at them, his eyes flashing momentarily gold, "are trespassing on my property." "Property?" Elara stepped back, her brow furrowing. "I'm not property. In their eyes you are a payday," Thorin said, finally looking at her fully. "In my eyes, you are a problem I should have dealt with months ago." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Elara flinched, but she didn't pull away. She felt the heat radiating from his skin. He was burning with a feverish intensity. When his thumb brushed her cheek, a spark of static electricity jumped between them, so sharp it made them both gasp. In that touch, Thorin felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in centuries. The pull. It was a biological tether, a soul-deep recognition that his Lycan half recognized before his human mind could process it. His inner wolf wasn't just protective, it was submissive to the very scent of her. "Who are you?" she asked, her breath hitching as his fingers lingered on her jaw. "I am the reason you're going to survive the next 10 minutes, Thorin said, his voice dropping an octave. "But if you come with me, Elara Vane, the life you knew, the quiet, the books, the safety of being ordinary, it ends tonight. There are things in this city that have smelled your blood. They know what you are even if you don't." "What am I?" she pressed, her heart racing. Thorin looked at the mercenaries who were now communicating via headsets, likely calling for reinforcements. "You are the key to a door that was locked 1,000 years ago. And I am the only one with the teeth to keep them from turning you." Suddenly, the roar of an engine echoed through the alley. A black SUV with tinted windows screeched to a halt at the entrance. "Decision time, Elara," Thorin said, extending a hand. His palm was calloused, scarred, and yet it looked like the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned to liquid. "Stay here and wait for the collectors, or come with the king and find out why the stars stop moving when you walk into a room." Elara looked at the approaching men in tactical gear, then back at the man who had watched her from the shadows for months. She didn't know him. He was a monster, a king, a stalker. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw a loneliness that mirrored her own, a vast, echoing emptiness that seemed to settle when their eyes met. She reached out and took his hand. The moment her fingers closed around his, a howl erupted from the rooftops nearby, not from Thorin but from his pack. The hunt was on. The world didn't just speed up, it shattered. Thorin's grip on Elara's hand was like a vice of warm iron. He didn't lead her toward the SUV. He pulled her in the opposite direction, toward a vertical fire escape that looked rusted enough to crumble. With a strength that defied physics, he hoisted her onto his shoulder as if she weighed no more than a bundle of silk. "Hold your breath," he commanded. Before Elara could even gasp, he leaped. They didn't climb, they soared. 10 feet, 20 feet. Thorin's boots kicked off the brickwork with explosive force. Elara's stomach did a slow-motion somersault as the alley floor receded into a blur of shadows and muzzle flashes. The dregs were firing now, the rhythmic thwip-thwip-thwip of silencers spitting silver-tipped darts into the air where they had stood a second before. They hit the rooftop with a heavy thud. Thorin set her down, but he didn't let go of her arm. He was scanning the horizon, his nostrils flaring. The air up here was colder, smelling of ozone and something sharp, like copper and burnt sugar. "Now, before we see what's truly hunting Elara, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a gut feeling that saved you from something? That instinct that tells you to turn left instead of right? Tell me your story in the comments. I love reading about your real-life intuition. And if you're enjoying the adrenaline, make sure to subscribe so you can see if Elara makes it out of this night alive." "Why are they shooting?" Elara gasped, her lungs burning from the sudden altitude shift. "I'm a librarian. I have $32 in my bank account and a cat that barely likes me." "They aren't hunting your bank account, Elara," Thorin said, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the shimmering lights of the North District. "They're hunting your marrow. There hasn't been a null born in 500 years. Not until you." "A null? What is?" Her question was cut short by a sound that made the very marrow in her bones vibrate. It wasn't a howl and it wasn't a human scream. It was a high-frequency screech like metal grinding on glass. From behind a massive water tether on the neighboring roof, a figure stepped out. He was dressed in a suit of such pristine silver-gray silk it seemed to glow. His skin was the color of bleached bone, and his eyes were entirely black. No iris, no pupil, just two voids of ink. This was Julian, his name taken from the cold brilliance of the Grand Budapest Hotel, and his surname, Moriarty, pulled from the shadows of Sherlock Holmes. He wasn't a Lycan. He was something older, something that didn't need fur to be a monster. "Thorin," Julian purred, his voice sounding like it was being projected from inside Elara's own head. "The king of dogs playing savior to a gutter stray? I expected more from the Covington line." Thorin stepped in front of Elara, his back expanding, his fingers twitching as they elongated into claws. "Moriarty. I should have known the High Coven would send their favorite lapdog to do the dirty work." "The Coven doesn't want her dead, Thorin." "Not yet," Julian said, tilting his head. He looked at Alara and for a second she felt a wave of nausea so intense she nearly collapsed. They want the spark. Do you have any idea what her blood can do to a Lycan's curse? One drop of a null's essence and you won't just be a king of the night. You'll be a god of the day. You'll never have to shift again. You'll never feel the moon's pull. You'll be human. Or as close as a beast can get. Alara's head spun. A null? Her blood. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just Alara. You're the end of his species, darling. Julian laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Suddenly Julian moved. He didn't run, he blurred. Thorin roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated territorial fury. He met Julian midair, a collision of brute strength and supernatural speed that sent a shockwave through the rooftop. The gravel under Alara's feet danced. She watched in horror as Thorin, the man who had been her silent guardian for months, was slammed back against a brick chimney, the structure shattering upon impact. Julian landed gracefully, his black eyes fixed on Alara. Come now, little Null. Let's see if your heart tastes as sweet as the legends say. Alara backed away, her foot hitting the ledge of the roof. 6 stories down. To her left, the stairs were blocked by more of Julian's pale-skinned guards. To her right, a sheer drop. In that moment of absolute terror, something shifted deep inside Alara. It wasn't a wolf and it wasn't a monster. It was a surge of white-hot energy that started in the small of her back and radiated outward. The air around her began to shimmer, the falling soot and dust freezing in midair as if time itself had hit a snag. Julian stopped. His black eyes widened. Impossible. You haven't been awakened. Leave him alone, Alara whispered. She didn't know where the words came from. As Julian lunged, Alara threw her hands up in a blind reflex. A pulse of pure, translucent force erupted from her palms. It wasn't magic. It was a vacuum, a total cancellation of the supernatural energy Julian used to move. The vampire hit the invisible wall and was hurled backward, his pristine suit smoking as if he'd touched a live wire. Thorin dragged himself up from the rubble, blood trickling down his temple, his golden eyes wide with shock. He had spent months wondering if she was the one. Now he had his answer. But the victory was short-lived. A red dot appeared on Alara's chest. A sniper positioned 3 blocks away had a lock. Alara down. Thorin screamed. He didn't reach her in time to stop the shot, but he reached her in time to fall with her. As the silver-tipped bullet hissed through the air, Thorin tackled her off the ledge. They were falling. The wind screamed past them, the lights of Oakhaven swirling into a kaleidoscope of danger. Trust me. Thorin growled into her ear, wrapping his massive arms around her, shielding her body with his own as they plummeted toward the dark canopy of the park below. The world went black as they hit the trees. The impact didn't kill them, but it fractured the world. Thorin had taken the brunt of the fall, his massive body snapping oak branches like toothpicks before they slammed into the damp, mossy earth of Oakhaven Central Park. Alara gasped, her lungs screaming for air that felt like liquid lead. She was pinned beneath the heavy, heat-radiating weight of the Lycan King. The smell of crushed pine and metallic blood filled her senses. For a terrifying heartbeat, Thorin didn't move. His breathing was a wet, ragged hitch in the darkness. Thorin, she whispered, her hands trembling as she pushed against his chest. Her fingers sank into the thick wool of his coat, slick with something warm. Thorin, wake up. Before we find out if the king survived the fall, I have a question for all of you watching. If you found out you had a secret power that could change the world, would you use it or would you try to hide and stay normal? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing your perspectives. And if you're rooting for Alara and Thorin to make it through this night, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. With a guttural groan, Thorin rolled off her. His face was a mask of strain, the golden hue of his eyes dimming. A jagged piece of silver nitrate shrapnel from the sniper's bullet was embedded in his shoulder, the skin around it hissing and turning a bruised, necrotic purple. Don't touch the wound, he wheezed, his teeth bared in a grimace of agony. Silver is poison to my blood. I have to get it out, Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tears blurring her vision. She reached out, and as her fingers brushed the edges of the blackened skin, that same white-hot hum she felt on the rooftop returned. The moment her skin met his, the hissing stopped. The purple veins receding from the wound as if her very touch were an antidote. Thorin's eyes snapped open, wide with a mixture of shock and something that looked dangerously like devotion. "You're neutralizing the silver," he whispered, his voice breathless. "Your essence. It's fighting the poison for me." "I don't know how I'm doing it," she admitted, her heart hammering. I can't let you die." For the first time, the predatory edge in Thorin's gaze softened. He looked at her not as a null, not as a political tool, but as Alara. "You shouldn't care," he said, his hand reaching up to shakily brush a stray hair from her forehead. "I'm the monster that's been stalking you for months." "You were protecting me," she countered. "Even if you didn't want to admit it." The moment was shattered by the distant baying of hounds. Not Lycans, but the Coven's shadow trackers, creatures of smoke and malice that Julian had unleashed to find them. "We can't stay here," Thorin said, gritting his teeth as he forced himself to stand. He was still weak, leaning heavily against a scorched tree trunk. "My safe house is 3 miles north. The tunnel's under the old subway line. If we can reach the iron gates, the Coven can't follow." As they began to move through the dense undergrowth, the dynamic between them shifted. Thorin was the king, the warrior, but he was wounded. Alara, the ordinary librarian, became his crutch. She draped his heavy arm over her shoulders, her small frame supporting his massive one. The journey was a blur of adrenaline and whispered confessions. To keep him conscious, Alara talked. She told him about the books she loved, about the way she always felt like she was waiting for a train that never arrived. And Thorin, in his delirium, spoke of the burden of the crown. He spoke of the blood moon tithe, a ritual he had been avoiding because it required him to take a human mate to solidify his power, a fate he had refused until he saw her. "I saw you in the library 4 months ago," he murmured, his head lolling near her ear. "You were reading a translation of the Vane Codex. My ancestors wrote that. You were the only human who didn't look at the script and see gibberish. You looked at it and cried." Alara stopped, her breath catching. "I didn't know why. It just felt lonely. Like a song with no one to hear it." "I heard it," Thorin whispered. They reached the entrance to the abandoned subway, a rusted iron mall leading into the bowels of the city. But as Thorin reached for the heavy chain, a red light flickered across the wall. Not a sniper this time. A motion sensor. Suddenly the ground beneath them hissed. A cloud of neurotoxic gas, specifically designed to paralyze Lycan physiology, billowed from the vents. Thorin collapsed instantly, his muscles seizing. "Thorin!" Alara screamed. From the shadows of the tunnel emerged a woman. She was dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back into a lethal ponytail. Her name was Selena, from the fierce elegance of Underworld, and her surname was Kyle, a nod to the shadows of the Batman. She wasn't with the Coven. She was a rogue agent, a mercenary who worked for the highest bidder. "The king is down," Selena said into a comms unit, her voice cold and professional. "And I have the null." She's even more radiant than the scans suggested. Selena leveled a high-voltage stun baton at Alara. "Don't make this difficult, sweetie. You're worth 1 billion credits to the right people. Alive, preferably. But I'm paid by the pound, not the personality." Alara looked at Thorin, paralyzed and helpless on the cold concrete. She looked at the woman who saw her as nothing more than a paycheck. The fear was there, but beneath it something else was boiling. A sense of injustice. A refusal to be a pawn in a game she never asked to play. "I am not," Alara said, her voice echoing in the tunnel, "for sale." As Selena lunged, Alara didn't flinch. She leaned into the power she didn't understand. She reached out and grabbed the stun baton with her bare hands. The electricity surged, but it didn't burn her. It was absorbed. Her eyes flared a brilliant, blinding white, and the shockwave that followed blew the heavy iron doors off their hinges and sent Selena flying back into the darkness. But as the dust settled, Alara realized the cost. The exertion was too much. Her vision tunneled and she fell beside Thorin, her hand searching for his in the dark. "I've got you," she whispered, just as she heard the sound of a dozen boots hitting the pavement above. The world was closing in and the king was the only thing left to hold on to. The damp, metallic scent of the subway tunnels usually signaled safety for the Lycan King, but as Thorin's senses slowly clawed back from the brink of paralysis, the air felt thick with a truth he hadn't been ready to face. He groaned, the neurotoxin finally flushing from his system thanks to the lingering warmth of Alara's hand still clasped in his. They were in the vault. a sanctuary carved into the bedrock beneath Oakhaven, filled with enough ancient manuscripts to make Alara's library look like a waiting room. The walls were lined with silver glass cases containing the history of a war that had never truly ended. "You're awake," Alara whispered. She was sitting on a stone bench, her face pale, her hands stained with the soot of their escape. The white glow in her eyes had faded, leaving them wide and haunted. "I have to know. If you discovered your entire life was based on a secret kept by your family, would you want to know the truth even if it put you in danger? Tell me in the comments. And if you're ready for the twist that changes everything, make sure you're subscribed. This is where the story turns upside down." Thorin sat up, his muscles screaming. He looked at the heavy iron doors she had literally blown off their hinges. "How did you do that?" "I don't know," Alara said, her voice trembling. "It felt like I was just taking back the space I was supposed to occupy. Like the world had been too loud and I finally found the mute button." Thorin stood, walking toward a pedestal at the center of the room. On it sat a leather-bound tome, its cover embossed with a crest Alara recognized from her dreams. A wolf entwined with a sun. "The dregs called you a null," Thorin said, his golden eyes fixed on the book. "They think you're a freak of nature. A human born without this spark that allows supernatural beings to sense or influence you. A blank space in our world. And isn't that what I am?" "No." Thorin turned to her, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. "A null doesn't just cancel power, Alara. A null reclaims it. There hasn't been one in 5 centuries because the last one didn't just hide. She was the queen who founded my line. She wasn't human. She was the source." Alara shook her head, backing away. "No. My parents were teachers. They died in a car crash when I was 3. I'm ordinary." "Were they?" Thorin stepped closer, his heat radiating off him in waves. "Look at the names you chose for yourself, Alara. Your aunt told you your name was Vayne? Look at the Vayne Codex again. It's not a book of myths. It's a lineage. Vayne is a corruption of the ancient word Vaynir, the shield." He opened the book to a page illuminated in gold leaf. There, sketched in ink that seemed to shimmer, was a woman who looked exactly like Alara, standing before a Lycan King who bore Thorin's exact jawline. "My ancestors didn't watch yours because they were prey," Thorin whispered, his voice cracking with a vulnerability he'd never shown. "They watched them because without a shield the king goes mad. The Lycan curse. It's a fire that eventually consumes us. The null isn't our enemy. You are the only thing that keeps us from becoming the monsters the world thinks we are." The revelation hit Alara like a physical blow. Her ordinariness wasn't a lack of something, it was a cage. Her parents hadn't died in a crash, they had been hiding her. "But Julian said..." Alara's voice trailed off. "He said my blood could make you human. That I could strip away the curse." "He lied," Thorin said, his eyes flashing. "He didn't want to make me human. He wanted to use you to unmake me. If a vampire drinks from a null, they don't just get power, they get the ability to walk in the sun. They become gods. He doesn't want to kill you, Alara. He wants to keep you in a cage as a living battery for eternity." Suddenly, the vault's heavy wards began to shimmer. A low, rhythmic thumping vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of a heartbeat amplified 1,000 times. "They're here," Thorin growled, his claws extending. But it wasn't the coven. The stone wall at the far end of the vault didn't break. It melted. From the liquid rock stepped a man Alara recognized from the library, the kindly old curator who had given her the Vayne Codex months ago. His name was Arthur, from the quiet wisdom of Inception, and his surname was Pendragon from the legends of Excalibur. But he wasn't kindly anymore. His eyes were the color of cold mercury. "Arthur," Alara gasped. "Child," Arthur said, his voice echoing with the weight of centuries. "The king is right about your blood, but he's wrong about his intentions. He says he wants to protect you, but he's just waiting for the blood moon tithe. He needs you to stay a king. I want to set you free." Arthur raised a hand and the very air in the vault turned to glass. "Thorin Covington is a beast who thinks a crown makes him a man. But you, Alara, you are the daughter of the sun. Why stay with a wolf in the cellar when you could rule the sky?" Thorin lunged, but Arthur was faster. With a flick of his wrist, he pinned the Lycan King to the wall with pillars of solidified shadow. "Choose, Alara," Arthur commanded, his hand outstretched. "The wolf who stalks you or the legacy that belongs to you. But decide quickly, because Julian and his dregs are 10 minutes away, and I am the only one who can hide you where the moon can't find you. Elara looked at Thorin, struggling against the shadows, his eyes pleading not for his life, but for her to run. She looked at Arthur, the man who had manipulated her entire life from the library stacks. The betrayal tasted like copper in her mouth. You gave me that book, Elara said, her voice cold. You didn't give it to me to help me. You gave it to me so I'd find out what I was and come running to you for protection. It worked, didn't it? Arthur smiled. Not quite, Elara said. She reached out, but she didn't take Arthur's hand. She grabbed the shadow pillars holding Thorin. The white light exploded from her fingertips, shattering Arthur's magic like cheap porcelain. The shockwave knocked the curator back, his mercury eyes wide with shock as his shield turned into a weapon. But as Thorin fell to the floor breathing hard, he looked at Elara with a new kind of fear. Because as the light faded, her hair was no longer brown. It was streaked with pure, shimmering silver. The awakening wasn't a gift. It was a beacon. And every monster in Oakhaven just saw it light up. The lines are drawn. The mentor is a traitor, the king is compromised, and Elara is glowing like a star in a city of shadows. The silver light didn't just fade. It died, leaving a cold, suffocating darkness that felt like a physical weight. Elara collapsed onto the stone floor, her muscles twitching as the raw power she'd channeled ebbed away, leaving her hollow. The silver streaks in her hair shimmered like dying embers in the dim vault light. Thorin was on his feet in a heartbeat, but he didn't reach for her. He stopped 3 feet away, his hands curled into trembling fists. His golden eyes were wide, reflecting a terror Elara hadn't seen even when he was facing a dozen mercenaries. Don't, he rasped, his voice a jagged edge of grief. Elara, if you touch me now, while the awakening is still active in your blood, you won't just neutralize the poison. You'll neutralize me. We've reached the moment where everything feels hopeless. Have you ever had to pull away from someone you cared about to protect them? It's the hardest thing in the world. Share your story in the comments. I'm here to listen. And if you're holding your breath for Elara and Thorin, please hit that subscribe button. We need your energy to get through this dark night. Elara looked at her hands. They were pale, translucent, and vibrating with a frequency that made the very air hum. I can't even hold you, she whispered, a tear carving a path through the soot on her cheek. Not until the surge passes, Thorin said, his jaw tight. If you touch a Lycan in this state, you'll strip the wolf from my soul. I'd be a man, yes, but I'd be a hollow shell. My people would be leaderless. The coven would slaughter every pack in the wards within the hour. The sacrifice was laid bare. To save him, she had to stay distant. To love him, she had to remain a weapon. Suddenly, the vault's ceiling groaned. Arthur Pendragon, recovered from the blast, stood silhouetted against the melting stone. He looked down at them not with anger but with a chilling, clinical detachment. You've accelerated the process, Elara, Arthur said, his voice echoing from every corner of the room. The silver in your hair. That's your life force burning at 10 times its natural rate. You're a star child. And stars eventually go supernova. You won't survive the night if you stay in this realm. Then let her go. Thorin roared, his voice breaking. Take her to the Sun Realms. Save her. I would, Arthur purred, but the High Coven has already breached the perimeter. And they brought the null chains. As if on cue, the iron doors didn't just open, they were liquidated. Julian Moriarty stepped through the mist, followed by a phalanx of dregs. But they weren't carrying guns. They carried heavy, pulsating chains forged from void steel, a substance designed to absorb the very light Elara was emitting. The king and the spark, Julian said, his black eyes fixed on Elara's silver hair. A tragic portrait. One can't touch and the other can't leave. Julian flicked his wrist. The void steel chains lashed out like snakes. Thorin leapt in front of Elara, taking the hit. The metal burned into his flesh, but it didn't just draw blood. It began to drain his strength, the black links turning a sickly, glowing violet as they fed on his Lycan energy. Thorin! Elara screamed. She tried to reach for the chains to dissolve them with her touch, but Selena Kyle, the mercenary from the tunnels, dropped from a ventilation shaft behind her. Selena didn't use a baton this time. She used a specialized containment field, a shimmering blue cube that slammed down over Elara, cutting her off from the room. Elara beat her fists against the translucent walls. Let him go. Take me, just let him go. Thorin was on his knees, the chains wrapping tighter around his throat and chest. He looked at Alara through the shimmer of her prison, his eyes fading from gold to a dull human brown. He was losing his connection to the wolf. He was losing the very thing that made him a king. Run. Alara. He gasped, his fingers clawing at the stone. She isn't going anywhere, Julian said, stepping over Thorin's collapsing form. He pressed his palm against Alara's containment field. By the time the blood moon reaches its zenith, you'll be the engine that powers my immortality. And the king? He'll be a memory in a shallow grave. Julian leaned closer, his voice a cold whisper that bypassed the glass. Did he tell you, Alara? Did he tell you that the only way to stabilize your power is to kill the thing you love most? The null shield is forged in betrayal. He knew. That's why he watched you. He was waiting for the moment he'd have to break your heart to save his kingdom. Alara froze. She looked at Thorin. He didn't look away. The guilt in his eyes was the loudest thing in the room. Is it true? She whispered. Thorin didn't answer. He couldn't. The void steel had silenced his voice. Julian laughed, the sound chilling and final. He's a king, darling. They always choose the crown over the girl. With a sharp command, the dregs dragged Thorin toward the dark abyss of the lower tunnels, while Julian and Selena began to transport Alara's containment unit toward the surface. Separated. Betrayed. Dying. As Alara was carried away, she looked back at the spot where Thorin had fallen. All that remained was a single silver-tipped claw snapped off in the struggle. The silence of the vault was the only answer to her heartbreak. The night had never been darker, and the moon was starting to turn a deep, vengeful red. Everything has fallen apart. Thorin is captured, Alara is a prisoner of her own power, and the sting of betrayal is deeper than any wound. Is there any way back from this? The holding cell in the High Coven's spire was a cathedral of glass and cold ambition. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the moon was no longer silver. It was a bruised, pulsating crimson. The blood moon had reached its zenith. Alara sat in the center of the containment field, her silver hair now glowing with a frantic, rhythmic pulse. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. Julian stood on the balcony, his back to her, watching the city of Oakhaven tremble under the psychic weight of the lunar eclipse. It's beautiful, isn't it? Julian said, his voice a silk ribbon of malice. The moment the world realizes it doesn't belong to the humans anymore. In 10 minutes, when I draw the first breath of your essence, the sun will never burn me again. We are at the edge of the abyss, everyone. Have you ever found strength in a moment where you thought you had nothing left? That spark that ignites when someone tells you, no? Tell me about your breakthrough in the comments. And if you want to see the Lycan King roar one last time, make sure you're subscribed. The finale is coming. Alara didn't look at Julian. She looked at her reflection in the reinforced glass. She saw the girl from the library, the one who hid in the stacks, the one who thought she was a nobody. But she also saw the silver fire in her eyes. He watched me because he had to break my heart, Julian's lie echoed in her head. But then she remembered the way Thorin had looked at her in the park. Not like a hunter. Not like a king looking at a tool. He had looked at her like a man who was finally, for the first time in centuries, warm. He didn't watch me to break me, Alara whispered, her voice gaining a metallic resonance. He watched me because he was the only one who knew I was worth saving. She reached out and touched the blue shimmer of the containment field. Usually it shocked her back. But this time she didn't pull away. She leaned into the pain. She realized the void steel and the energy fields weren't cages. They were filters. They were trying to catch a river in a net. I am the source, she realized, the words vibrating through the glass. And you can't cage the sun. Down in the pits of the spire, Thorin Covington was chained to a stone altar. The void steel was draining him, his skin pale, his pulse a faint, dying flutter. Beside him, Selena Kyle checked her watch. Time's up, Your Majesty, she said, drawing a silver-edged dagger. Julian wants your heart as a side dish. Thorin looked up, his eyes dull. But then he felt it. A vibration through the stone. A frequency he had memorized over 92 nights on a rooftop. It wasn't the moon. It was her. Forgot one thing, Thorin rasped, a bloody grin splitting his lips. And what's that? Selena asked, stepping closer. He never hunts alone. Suddenly the walls of the spire didn't just break, they exploded. A dozen Lycans, the elite Covington Guard, tore through the masonry. But they weren't attacking Selena. They were howling at the ceiling. Upstairs, Elara let out a scream that shattered every window in the spire. The containment field didn't just break, it inverted. The blue energy turned white, then gold, then a blinding crystalline silver. Julian turned, his black eyes widening in genuine terror. "What are you doing? You'll burn yourself out." "I'm not burning out," Elara said, standing up as the void steel chains around her wrists turned to dust. "I'm waking up." She raised her hand and the light didn't push Julian, it pulled the darkness out of him. The vampire shrieked as his artificial youth was stripped away, his skin wrinkling, his power hemorrhaging into the night air. Below, the surge of Elara's awakening hit Thorin like a lightning strike. It didn't strip his wolf, it purified it. The void steel chains shattered. His eyes snapped open, glowing with a brilliance that outshone the blood moon. He shifted, not into a beast of burden, but into a titan of silver and shadow, a true Lycan King empowered by his shield. He tore through the guards like paper, leaping up the elevator shaft in a single bound. He burst onto the penthouse floor just as Julian was lunging for Elara's throat with a jagged shard of glass. Thorin met him mid-air, his massive jaws closing around the vampire's shoulder, hurling him through the shattered window and into the abyss of the city below. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Elara's ragged breathing. She was standing at the edge of the balcony, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her body glowing so brightly she looked like a fallen star. Thorin shifted back, his human form scarred but radiant. He stood at the edge of her light, his hand outstretched. "Elara," he whispered. "Don't go. Stay in this world. With me." "I'm too bright, Thorin," she said, her voice sounding like wind chimes. "If I touch you, I'll destroy you." "Then let me be destroyed," Thorin said, stepping into the light. As he reached for her, the blood moon began to fade, the eclipse passing. The red light was replaced by the first blue-gray hints of dawn. "We solve this together," Thorin promised, his fingers inches from hers. The king and his shield. No more watching from rooftops. No more secrets. Elara looked at his hand, scarred, steady and warm. She took a breath and reached back. The moment their fingers touched, the world went white. The bond is sealed, the traitor is gone, and the power is finally under control. But how does a Lycan king and a sun-daughter live in a world that wants to tear them apart? The explosion of white light didn't just illuminate the penthouse. It tore through the artificial night Julian had spent centuries building. As Elara and Thorin's fingers interlaced, a resonant hum vibrated through the very bedrock of Oakhaven. It wasn't the sound of destruction. It was the sound of a circuit finally closing. The null energy that had been burning Elara from the inside out found its anchor. Thorin didn't wither, he expanded. The Lycan curse, that jagged fire in his blood, smoothed out into a steady rhythmic pulse of power. He wasn't just a king anymore, he was a conduit. We are at the summit of the story. Have you ever found that one person who makes your chaos feel like order? That's the power of a true bond. Tell me who your anchor is in the comments below. And if you're cheering for this duo to take back their city, make sure you hit that subscribe button. The victory is almost here. But the shadows weren't finished. From the wreckage of the elevator shaft, Arthur Pendragon pulled himself upright. His curator facade was gone, replaced by a terrifying mercury-skinned entity. He had absorbed the residual void steel from the broken chains, and his hands were now twin blades of absolute darkness. "You think a touch can save you?" Arthur roared, his voice sounding like grinding tectonic plates. "The balance of the world requires a sacrifice. If the shield won't break, the king must fall." Arthur lunged, moving with a speed that bypassed the physical. He wasn't targeting Thorin, he was targeting the connection. If he could sever their joined hands, the feedback loop would vaporize them both. "Elara, don't let go," Thorin commanded. He didn't shift fully. Instead, he allowed the silver fur to ripple across his arms, his strength multiplying as he swung a heavy marble desk like a shield to intercept Arthur's shadow blades. The marble disintegrated into dust upon contact. "I'm not letting go," Elara said, her voice sounding like a choir. "I'm pushing back." She closed her eyes, visualizing the library, the quiet rows of books, the way she used to mute the world. She reached for that silence and threw it at Arthur. It wasn't a blast of light. It was a total cancellation of sound and motion. Arthur froze midair, his shadow blades flickering and dying. For a heartbeat, the curator looked like a man again, old, tired, and terrified of the sun. "Thou Thorin!" Alara shouted. Thorin let out a roar that echoed through every Lycan ward in the city. He didn't use his claws. He used the silver energy Alara was feeding him. He struck Arthur's chest with a palm thrust that carried the weight of a falling moon. The impact didn't draw blood. It drew light. The mercury skin of the traitorous mentor began to crack, gold fire leaking from the fissures. Arthur Pendragon didn't die, he was unmade. His physical form dissolved into thousands of ancient, glowing vellum pages that swirled in the wind before disintegrating into harmless ash. The manipulator of Oakhaven was gone, returned to the myths he had tried to weaponize. But the spire was collapsing. The structural integrity had been compromised by the raw output of their combined power. "We have to get out of here," Selena Kyle shouted from the doorway. She had turned her coat, helping the Covington guard clear out the remaining dregs. "The whole building is going down." Thorin looked at Alara. Her silver hair was still glowing, but the frantic pulse had calmed. She looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see a stalker or a monster. She saw her equal. "Can you fly?" Thorin asked with a daring, wolfish grin. "I can fall," Alara laughed, her voice clear and bright. "As long as you're catching me." Thorin swept her into his arms. He didn't use the stairs or the elevator. He ran straight for the edge of the shattered window. With a massive, lunging leap, they soared out into the dawn. The spire groaned and buckled behind them, a monument to greed falling into the sea of the city. As they plummeted, Alara didn't scream. She reached out, her fingers trailing through the clouds, and for a split second she turned the air beneath them solid. They didn't hit the ground. They glided. They landed in the center of the park, right where they had fallen hours before. But this time the sun was fully above the horizon. The shadows were just shadows again. The Covington guard emerged from the trees, dropping to one knee as they saw their king. But Thorin didn't look at them. He stayed on his feet, holding Alara as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. "The hunt is over," Thorin declared, his voice carrying through the morning mist. "The king has found his shield. And Oakhaven belongs to the light again." Alara leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. The library girl was gone. In her place stood the sun daughter, the woman who had brought a king to his knees and a city to its feet. The battle is won, the villains are gone, and a new era has begun. But how does Alara adjust to a life of royalty and power? The morning after the fall of the spire, Oakhaven felt like a city that had finally woken up from a fever dream. The oppressive, heavy smog that usually clung to the streets had been swept away by the raw energy of the eclipse, leaving the air crisp and smelling of rain. Alara stood on the balcony of the Covington estate, a sprawling manor hidden deep within the protected forestry of the North Wards. She wasn't wearing a tattered cardigan anymore. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that caught the morning light. Her hair remained streaked with that shimmering, permanent silver, a crown of her own making that she no longer tried to hide. "We've reached the end of our journey. I want to know, what was your favorite moment of this epic story? Was it the rooftop leap, the revelation in the vault, or the final stand against Julian? Let me know in the comments below. And if you loved this emotional ride, please make sure you've subscribed and hit that notification bell. Your support allows me to keep telling these stories of love and power." Thorin stepped out behind her, his footsteps silent on the stone. He didn't look like a beast of the night. He looked like a man who had finally found peace. He draped his heavy black coat over her shoulders, his hands lingering on her arms. "The council has retreated," Thorin whispered into her ear, his voice a warm hum. "The dregs have scattered. Without Julian and Arthur to pull the strings, the Null Hunt has officially been declared a crime against the wards. You're safe, Alara. Truly safe." Alara leaned back into him, the heat of his body anchoring her. "I don't just want to be safe, Thorin. I want to be useful. I spent my whole life feeling like a blank page. Now I realize I was just waiting for the right ink." "The archive at the estate is 10 times larger than St. Jude's," Thorin said, a playful spark in his golden eyes. "And I suspect the books won't cry when you read them anymore. They'll sing." He turned her around to face him. The tension that had defined their first meeting in the alley was gone, replaced by a deep, earned intimacy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a diamond, but a ring forged from the same void steel that had once been her cage, now purified and glowing with a soft, steady light. "Elara Vane," Thorin said, his voice thick with emotion. "I watched you for 92 nights because I was afraid of what you were. Now I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what you mean to me. Will you stay? Not as my shield but as my queen." Elara looked at the ring, then up at the man who had risked his crown and his life to protect her. She didn't need a library to find her story anymore. He was living it. "Only if you promise one thing," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Anything." "No more rooftops," she laughed. "From now on, if you want to see me, just walk through the front door." Thorin laughed, a deep, joyful sound that echoed through the trees, and swept her into a kiss that tasted of dawn and new beginnings. As they stood there, the sun climbing higher into the sky, the lichens in the forest below let out a chorus of melodic howls. It wasn't a call to war. It was a song of welcome. The ordinary girl from the library had found her place. The king who watched from the shadows had finally stepped into the light. And in the heart of Oakhaven, a new legend was being written, one where the monster and the girl didn't just survive the night, they owned the day. Thank you all so much for joining me for this incredible story. If you enjoyed this journey of fate, power, and love, please leave a comment with the word king, so I know you made it to the very end. Don't forget to subscribe for our next emotional adventure. Until next time, keep looking at the stars. You never know who might be watching back.